Okay, so we're back again, and this time we're going to have a really quick look at how we got to where we are today. So this is a very, very brief history, not of time, but of technology. So, and there's some pretty important concepts that we need to get our heads around, which ultimately is going to help us understand and be able to contextualize the other types of technology that we'll be working with in this course as well. So this is as equally relevant to the big data, and so we're talking about big data and Internet of Things today, but equally relevant to AI and to blockchain as we move forward. So let me just move my slide. So you guessed it, technology isn't new. We've been using technologies essentially since we started building tools. During the Stone Age, we built tools with edges. Then as we moved through the Bronze and the Iron Age, we saw the evolution of tools made of metal. We started communicating with each other by leaving messages, initially cave paintings and other kinds of rock drawings. And then over time, we developed writing and other technologies that assisted us to communicate with each other and across borders. The first industrial revolution really didn't start until the late 1700s and really transformed existing economies, particularly those involving agriculture or handicraft, as we saw a mechanization and the development of not only new equipment and technologies to make linen and cotton and other fabrics, or to print documents, those kind of things, but we also saw new ways of organizing ourselves. And so there were a whole lot of new legal considerations that needed to be thought about at that time. And around that time, not coincidentally, we saw an evolution in the way that we looked at business structures. So the company was created, for example, and the company itself is a legal fiction. It is something that has been created, a method of doing business and of dealing with suppliers, employees, and customers that is created effectively out of a legal fiction. Now, the company, we will talk, when we talk about companies, about common law companies, because the Australian company, as we understand it today, has evolved out of what was originally a piece of legislation in the United Kingdom. But there are very similar approaches that have been taken throughout the world now. And I think that while they are similar, they're not the same. And again, that's a kind of legal consideration you're going to have to take into account. When we refer to the second industrial revolution, we tend to be referring to the atomic age or the space age, the development of and the use of technologies to develop weapons and to take Australia, not necessarily Australia, to take humans off this planet and begin exploring more broadly. The third industrial revolution is generally referred to as late 20th century, with the beginnings of the World Wide Web, the emergence of personal computers, and a real move globally, particularly in developed countries, from manufacturing economies to information economies. And then the fourth industrial revolution has really begun in the last 10 years or so, as we see significantly more connectivity between devices and artifacts because of the internet. And so we're seeing devices that are continuously connected and are able to diagnose and make decisions without necessarily requiring human intervention. Let me show you this infographic. Actually, I'm going to just pop it over here so it takes up most of the screen. You will see the infographic. I will pop it into the canvas so you can see it. This was created a few years ago now, but I think it gives us a good starting point for thinking about a history of computer science. So a lot has happened in the last 60 years or so, but actually computer science goes way back. The first historical record of a computing tool for doing calculations is really the abacus. So those who had an abacus back in the day, they really had an edge over those Luddites who were still counting cows by using their fingers. Um, the oldest known complex computing device, known as the Antikythera mechanism, actually goes back to around 87 BC. The assumption or the belief is that the Greeks used this gear-operated contraption to calculate astronomical positions and to help them navigate through the sea. It was actually found in a shipwreck in the Aegean Sea early in the 20th century, but it's really only been since about 2006 that we've had any real sense of what it was used for. Absolutely fascinating. I think the next big leap is 1843. That's when English mathematician Ada Lovelace, the daughter, in fact, of Lord Byron, the poet, and who was collaborating with a gentleman called Charles Babbage, who was the one who devised the theory of the first programmable computer. But Ada took it from theory and actually into practice, wrote the first computer algorithm. Modern day computing took a while to follow on. It was during the Second World War that Alan Turing conceived of the Turing machine. And of course, there were then 3 Bell Labs scientists who got a Nobel Prize in 1956 for inventing the transistor. And it was the transistor that made modern style computing possible in the first place. So what's really important is that from the 1960s, it was possible to use magnetic cores to store memory in a device. And memory is fundamental to any kind of computer. The speed of access of that memory is critical, and also how much energy it consumes. Like I mentioned, 60 years ago, computers took up whole rooms, and they were slow and they were cumbersome and they were very difficult to program. But the development of dynamic RAM or DRAM in the 1970s, which put a semiconductor and a microprocessor onto single chips, provided a realistic opportunity for memory to become usable and fast without having to take up huge amount of spaces. That meant that people could start to have computers in their offices. They could have personal computers, and that they could work much more efficiently and effectively. In 1974, we saw the first LCD watch on somebody's wrist. And by 1980, personal computing was a reality. That was helped by the invention in the 1980s and the sale of the hard disk and the CD-ROM drive. And then in the early 90s, the development of what we now think of as the internet, the World Wide Web. So for decades, computing technology was exclusive to the government and to the military. But then, actually, academic institutions came online next. And then in the 1980s, we saw Steve Wozniak build a circuit board for the Apple I, and home computing became practicable. Tim Berners-Lee is credited for developing the World Wide Web, and Mark Andreessen, now a very famous entrepreneur and investor, built a browser. And that's how we came to live in a world where everything is connected, that ultimately the Internet of Things can exist, and devices connected to the Internet can talk to each other, and we can get information from them. With wearable computers, I'm wearing my Garmin watch here, with embedded chips, smart appliances. I should show you my new fridge. I'm completely in love with it. And a whole heap of other advances in progress and on the horizon. The journey towards building smarter, faster, and more capable computers is really just beginning. So I mentioned, there's a link to the infographic, by the way, on the screen. So I mentioned too the importance of memory. And the unit these days is what we think about as an integrated circuit. So we started 1947 with the invention of the transistor, 1956 Nobel Prize. Integrated circuits, chips were first invented in 1958, but as more and more components got crammed in, we saw more and more speed and efficacy. And now we're really at the beginnings of what is going to, we expect to be called quantum computing, as the speed and efficiency of that computer memory is really only limited by the physical hardware. Which brings us to one of the most important ideas that you're going to come across over and over again. We call it Moore's Law. So Gordon Moore, picture on the slide here, he was one of the co-founders of a company called Intel. You've probably seen them. They make chips, Intel inside. They is often a sticker demonstrating quality on a computer near you. So let me zoom in a little bit and just show you a kind of bigger picture of the Moore's Law and essentially the ways in which it's actually played out in real life. So basically, I think it's cut off at the bottom here of the screen, but think of the x-axis here as being time. So time going this way. Can't find my pen today, so I'm just doing this in a funny way. And you can see basically this is the history of the development. These are the different names of different types of chips. And basically the number of transistors starting at the 50,000 chips. It just feels so hard to get my head around. But then we're talking about 50 million chips by the time we get up to this element. And you can see that basically this rough logarithmic scale has been moving generally in accordance with Moore's Law, which I always like to think of is, well, technically it's that the number of transistors will double approximately every 2 years. Another way of thinking about this is that the memory and speed of your computer can double every 2 years, but without the cost necessarily being completely doubling as well. In fact, far from it. The cost of personal computers has stayed roughly the same in real terms over time. So one of the things I think is really interesting is that since 2011, we've been in a situation where a transistor can be on a single electron. It's unbelievable when you think about it. It actually makes my head hurt. The other thing that you might find interesting, those of you who are doing this online without the, by audio and not seeing the PowerPoint, might be worth having a look at the PowerPoint page with the heading Moore's Law, because the third box basically shows how incredible that size differentiation is. So in 1971, going from 10 microns being the minimum size of a CPU down to, in 2022, we're talking about 3 nanometers. Now, again, this size, the tininess of it, if that's a word, is actually impossible for us as mere humans to really recognize or to anticipate. So did that one. I think what's also important here is to think about the ways that memory keeps expanding. So and it become more and more portable, or you don't actually even have to be with it at all. So in the year 2000, the flash drive became ubiquitous, and about the biggest one you could get, and you paid a lot of money for it, and they weren't terribly reliable, to be perfectly frank, would be a 4 gigabyte USB. These days, many of us will have a terabyte of data stored in something like a Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive with Microsoft. Of course, those products didn't offer quite as much of that cloud computing drive when they first came out, but they've been around since about 2006. And since 2009, it's been quite easy for a personal computer to have an internal or an external hard drive with a terabyte of data available locally as well. So why mention all of this? The global capacity to store information has doubled every 40 months since the 1980s. So according to IDC, the overall global data sphere is now in excess of 64 zettabytes. Well, it was in 2020. So there's a really good report. There's a QR code on the slide that can take you to that report from IDC. Again, it's a 2020 report, so it's a little bit out of date at the moment, but Internet of Things is really supported by the growth in data, and it's been since before 2020 the fastest growing data segment, followed by social media. So devices that have got connectivity are growing faster than TikTok. And this matters because 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. Again, a little bit old, this infographic, which I will also share with you on Canvas. Basically, again, around 2018, this showed the amount of data that was being produced every day globally. Worth having a look at it, and I'm sure you clever chooks will find something that's a little bit more up to date. So the next part of this history that is really worth making sure we understand is the importance of cloud computing here. So the use of distributed storage technology rather than local storage by using shared computing resources. So basically, that's all cloud computing is. It's connecting a network of remote servers that are hosted on an internet to store, manage, and process data rather than doing it in real time upfront. So a good example of that, those of you who are runners, you might have a watch like mine. I finish my watch, I then send it to, I'm using Garmin, but there are plenty of other suppliers. One of the things that drives me a little bit batty is that it will actually, I'll get an alert on my phone saying that it's already at Strava before I can see it on my phone. Why is that, I used to think? And then I suddenly realized, what is happening is that the data is going from my watch into the cloud. Strava is then extracting that and processing it. And for whatever reason, Strava is actually sending its report back to my phone even quicker than Garmin itself can send it back. That's because that data is being sourced from the cloud, in the case of Strava. It's being processed in the cloud, and it's being stored in the cloud. So, brave new world. What will the future hold? I think understanding what the Internet of Things is and what that means for us is going to be absolutely key to understanding that, and that's what we'll be talking about in the next video. I look forward to talking to you then and there.